Recording in progress.
A very good morning.
They don't have it. Hello.
And a very good day to everybody in the audience. I would really like to thank MRSI for this fabulous opportunity to present our paper titled, I think we have to do something about this, otherwise the paper title doesn't appear. Data-driven interventions to enrich human capital. It is really a privilege and an honor. I am Dr. Bikramjit Chaudhary, one of the authors of this paper, and I'm joined by Mr. Vipin Sharma, who is a co-author. Vipin couldn't really make it in person, but he is joining me remotely. So from the standpoint of what we are trying to achieve in this paper, it is predominantly about taking the entire journey across the entire spectrum of coverage, encompassing the various facets that one really need to capitalize on to ensure that we can really enrich the human capital. And from that standpoint, the various facets that you can see on the screen really needs nourishment, really needs actual further enrichment, and really needs interventions in a very, very scientific way. That's what we have attempted to do through the different elements and key components of attrition, hiring, and associated engagement in order to make the entire journey really, really enriching for the employees and from that standpoint, all the stakeholders in this entire journey. So building a high performance.
Organizations need to create impactful employee journeys, right from deeper understanding of hiring levers to delivering consistent employee engagement and sharper models to predict and prevent attrition. Currently, most of these initiatives are driven by separate talent acquisition and HR teams, without a consolidated, data-driven approach that can provide a unified view of the employee. This pertinent paper on data-driven interventions to enrich human capital will introduce you to an integrated approach to connect three key components of hiring, attrition, and engagement. The robust connected data ecosystem will leverage relevant historical records, build right connectors, and capture insights through surveys to plug critical data gaps. Bookmark this paper for an integrated solution on maximizing employee engagement scores with a unified data-driven model from recruitment to performance management to further career transitions.
So from the standpoint of encapsulating the summary of what we have tried to achieve in this paper is something that you got a sort of visibility through this video. So starting small and then developing solutions for each of the three components comprising of attrition and retention. Number two, doing scientific data-driven hiring. And number three, again, data-driven engagement, personalized for each employee, are really the crux of the entire solution. So just to set the context from the standpoint of the need gaps, the types of problems that almost every organization have really faced, especially post-pandemic, is what you can sort of empathize with, right? So you can see, for example, the productivity of employees have really been impacted through remote working to a certain extent, and also because of the hybrid model of working. The profitability per employee had nosedived. And these are some of the real case scenarios that we are talking about. And I had the opportunity of working across people analytics in different geographies. And these are some of the common denominators based on which the entire experience has been really cultivated. So what you will see in this paper is not based on isolated solution development, but based on best practices that have been disseminated, and hence they are applicable in majority of the situations that we sort of deal with. So these HR KPIs need resolution on war footing from different organizations. So what sort of interventions can we bring to the table in order to make sure that each of these questions are addressed scientifically and unambiguously? So a quick literature review. In addition to all the historical work that we have worked in this space, many other research papers were referred to in order to make sure that we really curve out the most appropriate, relevant, pertinent solution to address all three facets of attrition, retention, engagement, and hiring. So Dr. Dina Passage demonstrated that it is feasible to predict the successful placement of a candidate for a specific position at the pre-hire stage and utilize predictions to devise a global optimization model. In a co-authored research paper between myself and Dr. Rima Ghosh Chaudhary, we established that the interlinkages between the factors that drive motivation and commitment are really paramount to strike the right chord and have the right engagement with the employees. Kevin explained how different kinds of global threats and crises shape workplaces in varied ways, and how these shape the psychological behavior and also the cultural elements in an organization. In terms of building machine learning-oriented models, UZaho evaluated the performance of 10 supervised machine learning techniques on various HR datasets to suggest feature-based ranking and feature ranking, and that really paved the way for many such work in the subsequent phases. Franklin Combe explained how training and development is a critical success and a critical process which seeks to improve the performance of workers in the organization. And Edward Rubin illustrated the problems between customer churn and employee churn and their connections. And that's really the key, the connection between the two, and how machine learning techniques have really helped to bridge that gap and establish that connection. Okay, so what are the research questions that we try to address? We try to address research questions which are related to attrition, tried with engagement, as well as with respect to hiring. Who, when, what, why? All the questions are really very pertinent. Who will leave? When is that employee expected to leave? Why is that employee expected to leave? And what can we do to prevent that attrition from happening? For employee hiring, the questions were mostly around the fitments that you can strike with data-driven interventions. And for employee engagement, the questions were around how we can create an ecosystem in order to ensure that you have strike the right resonance with the employees. So for most of our engagements through the entire process, data maturity assessment was one of the pivotal keys, right? And those sorts of voids and gaps are absolutely needs addressal on our footing. So we created multiple buckets from the standpoint of the data that needs to be brought into play and plug in the gaps. Bucket number 1, ready and well curated for analytical consumption. Bucket number 2, available in bits and pieces and hence may need partial or total overhaul. Bucket number 3, not available but needed to be created from the scratch. And hence, from a resolution standpoint, there were several types of actions that we need to take, inclusive of structured employee satisfaction survey, psychometric tests to targeted employee group, and targeted employee surveys to feel missing information. So before we get into the attrition-related resolution in isolation, here is a quote which is basically a sort of an outcome that came through from a webinar that Datamatics organized, and one of my co-panelists from Johnson & Johnson had made this quote, and which is so very pertinent, and nothing can be truer than this, as our analysis subsequently sort of suggests. So decoding employee attrition, this may look like a monstrous solution architecture, but if it is, for example, deciphered a little bit step by step, it gives you a complete picture. But the solution, of course, was far from simple. Initially, in fact, they appeared to be insurmountable. So not only from the data maturity assessment plugin standpoints, we had to run several machine learning models in conjunction in order to find the best fits. And then based on the precision and the accuracy of this, the attrition risks by each employee were classified into high, medium, and low. And for the high attrition risk buckets, we had to create a deep learning algorithm with survival analysis in the backdrop, which is essentially the deep serve algorithm amalgamated with Cox regression, which essentially gives you when is a high employee expected to leave. This was the crux, and this was far from trivial. So while the what, why are not so difficult to really decipher, but when is one of the real critical elements, and that is something that we managed to work out through an amalgamation of ML and DL. Hence, from the standpoint of the solution, the entire journey from descriptive to diagnostic to predictive to finally prescriptive, what we need to do in order to arrest attrition was also addressed. Shortlisting profiles from a hiring standpoint was also a very interesting exercise, which actually meant with the attrition model, we had to further plug in discriminant analysis to ensure that the risk factors of early flight, as well as the performance risk of each employee, both are taken care of. So at the end of the day, you have to have employees who are hired who will perform at a very high level, but at the same point of time should have minimal risk of flight, at least at the early stage. So the intersection of A and B that you see on the screen, the Venn diagram, are the ideal traits of employees who can be hired, who will give you high performance, and at the same point of time will have much lesser chance of actually attriting in the early stages of their engagement. The engagement piece is possibly one of the most pivotal one in the entire journey. The quote you can see over here is again from one of my fellow panelists in this webinar, and this in some way encapsulates what employee engagement is all about, the empathy that we really need to bring in along with data-driven intervention. So finding the key drivers for engagement required several surveys to come into play and all in conjunction. And unless and until they are orchestrated and driven in a very synchronized fashion, the insights related to motivation, the insights related to what are the commitment drivers, and the entire journey from satisfaction to engagement to inspiration cannot be achieved. So this entire exercise, which has to be done in a very synchronized fashion, had really given us a great insight about how to go about making sure that the employees are engaged in a very systematic, personalized way. So if I have to say what is the icing on the cake is essentially the integrated solution. encapsulating and bringing in every facets of why, what, when, how of the attrition. Also, how do you do the best hiring from the standpoint of fitment, keeping in mind the performance as well as the flight risk, and how do you engage your employees in a way so that the overall ecosystem and the environment is conducive for the long haul and the long career. So this integration really helped us make sure that we are being able to orchestrate the engagement programs for employees in a systematic fashion right from the day one. So some of the key insights that you are being able to see as part of this exercise, the types of high-risk employees that we have seen across different studies, and these include different geographies, different practice areas, different functional areas, and different industries. And these are some of the common elements that we have noted over here. In specific cases have specific other traits as well. The key over here is what we need to sort of remember, that at the end of the day, our solution brings in a very individual, personalized identification of what are the drivers of attrition in this particular case. So if we have global drivers, that may not really help you to figure out a solution to retain them. The drivers have to be identified for each individual, especially the high risk. And each of them may have different reasons for actually going for an attrition or going through a process of looking out for other opportunities. If those drivers are not identified at the individual specific level, then you will never be able to orchestrate appropriate retention measures. Hence, the solution that we have carved out are not only applicable at a global level, but applicable at a very specific individual level, which helps us make the right corrective measure to retain and create the necessary employee motivation. Some of the popular misconceptions that people have about hiring and about who will be the better performers, the more tenured ones or the initial fresher ones. Some of the myth busters also came through these data-driven interventions. If we just go heuristically, sometimes we are extremely misled. A comparison between the predicted versus the actual hiring model performance, this speaks volume of the level of accuracy, the level of precision, and the level of overall reliability on the outcome our models can have. And this is across the three components of hiring, of retention and engagement, and also the integrated solution encompassing all the three. So the decisions can be taken with high degree of conviction and confidence. So facets of inspiration, motivation, and commitment, as you can see, this more or less encapsulates what are the key drivers of inspiration, motivation, commitment, and how we can leverage them in a key orchestrated way to make a decisive impact. And this is not only based on simply diagnostics, but also based on some sort of root cause analysis driven by structural equation modeling. So it is the cause-effect relationship that can be deciphered out of here, and hence the actions can be taken with much greater conviction. Holistic insights from all this exercise, and that's really one of the crux, is that your performance at the end of the day really is a function of how well you are engaged. When the engagement score is high, the attrition levels are low. So you can see that there will be a very negative correlation, strong negative correlation between your engagement score versus attrition score. And similarly, high correlation between your engagement score versus performance score. And engagements will have to be orchestrated at individual level, and those can be carved out when you apply machine learning, but also very, very customized, like the LIME, where you can actually identify and diagnose individual specific needs and requirements. So to conclude, we have addressed our overall approach in this paper in two phases, two critical phases. Number one, identifying each of the areas of attrition, hiring, and engagement decisively but initially in an isolated fashion. Number two, in phase two, integrated the three components into a holistic solution so that you can orchestrate the programs in a synchronized way to cultivate engagement, to reduce attrition, and to do the hiring based on data-driven interventions to enrich human capital. And our paper presents a very strong case for bringing in machine learning and deep learning oriented decision support systems to support the entire journey from hiring to engagement to attrition. Where do we go from here? I think the opportunities are immense. What we have found working across industry and different geographies, functional areas, that most of the organizations are at this moment, even today, at a nascent stage in terms of their people analytics and HR analytics oriented interventions, especially scientific pursuits. So from that standpoint, the suggestion will be to start with a baseline model and then over a period of time add nuances related to industry, functions, and other aspects, even the geographical aspects, to make the model robust. The framework and the solution that we have suggested over here really creates an ideal platform to launch those sorts of engagements. And not only that, our model and our framework actually helps to extend the employee engagement, employee attrition to customer engagement, customer attrition, and customer life cycle, and eventually connected the dots between employee satisfaction to customer satisfaction, employee engagement to customer engagement, and employee inspiration to customer delight. Thank you so very much for your time, for your attention. I'm open to questions now.
Hello. Hi. Hello. Yeah. Thank you so much, Doctor, for taking the time out and taking us through such an insightful topic. We have a few questions from the audience for you. The first question being, with MR being under a constant pressure of evolving into a more tech-enabled industry and the boundaries between analytics and MR getting blurred, shall we see MR as a pooled industry of research and analytics rather than a standalone one? Rather than a standalone.
Yeah, I think it's a great, am I audible? Okay. I think it's a great question. So I won't like to look at it as two different isolated components. Every problem needs an addressal which has to be very specific to the nature of the problem. As we see across the evolution of the industry, and I'm not only talking about MR as such, but a holistic approach to a solution is always most desirable. So from the standpoint of this specific question, most of the time, the addressal will depend on sound, robust research and banking on that research, doing high-end analytics. So when the two comes together, then the magic is created. So my recommendation will be to look at it holistically and cohesively to provide a solution.
And the second question for you is, have you created a standard tool for data to be input in your model? Also, do you check the technical skill set of the individual?
Again, a great question. You saw the data maturity assessment framework that I sort of talked about over here. So the data maturity assessment framework is applicable not only for these types of problems, only for people analytics or only from HR analytics. The data maturity assessment is an absolute need because even today, most of even when you are trying to engage in an analytics assignment, especially data science related assignments, you will see 80% of the heavy lifting is on the data cleaning, the data curation, making the data consumable for analytical consumption. So from that standpoint, a tool is absolutely essential. It creates a framework for you to launch on the scientific pursuits or very, very seamlessly. So it is absolutely very, very important from that standpoint. What was the second question?
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Let's hear it
Thanks for your
again for
time.
Datamatics and team, everyone.